President.
Senator from California.
Mr. President, I thank my colleague from the state of Colorado for yielding and staying for a few minutes because I know that he shares one of my key observations as I woke up this morning preparing for today's discussion, today's debate, and for today's series of votes. And that is the American people can be forgiven if they're tuning in today to this discussion and wondering, haven't I seen this before? This sounds awful familiar. It was a little over 7 years ago, in December of 2017, that Republicans passed the single biggest priority of the first Trump administration. No, it wasn't record investment in our nation's infrastructure. That was promised almost on a weekly basis. Never happened under the first Trump administration. And despite their best efforts, it was not repealing the Affordable Care Act, as they pledged to do time and time again. What Republicans were successful in doing was passing a historic tax break for the wealthiest Americans. It added nearly $2 trillion to our nation's debt. Deficit hawks, are you listening? $2 trillion that could have gone to improve public schools, could have gone to address the housing supply challenges in our nation, could have gone to helping lift children and families out of poverty. But no, a tax break for the wealthiest Americans and some of the largest corporations on the planet. Yes, in their actions in 2017, it included a permanent cut to the corporate tax rate by 14%. So it begs the question, what was the impact of these tax breaks? It's been a pretty good few years for some people. Again, as these large corporations and the wealthiest Americans, it has been a great economic ride for them, but not for working families. Most Americans have since increasingly struggled with the cost of groceries, the cost of putting gas in the car, struggling to pay the mortgage or the rent. And we can flash forward from 7 years ago to just this last November. We know the election results. I'm not an election denier. I know who won. And I know one of the big takeaways that people on both sides of the aisle learned from the results was that Americans were voting for lower prices, or so they thought. And so I want to ask a question and follow it up with an explanation to my Republican colleagues. When is enough enough? Because since the day Donald Trump took office for a second term, we continue to see prices going up, not down. Yes, the president that promised to lower prices on day one through his statements, through his rhetoric, through his policies and actions has led to price increases across the board. The richest president in American history has appointed a cabinet, but who does he have by his side day in, day out? It's the richest man in the world to help guide these decisions. Decisions like imposing universal tariffs, which actually raises the cost of goods that Americans buy, from clothes to groceries to electronics and everything in between. It is a tax, folks. It may not be called a tax, but we know how it works. American companies have to pay more to import goods. They pass those increased costs on to the consumer, so consumers are paying more. It's like a tax increase. Some argue that, well, by paying more, it's more money into the U.S. Treasury. Well, where's that money going to go? Is it going to public education? Donald Trump and Republicans are trying to eliminate the Department of Education. Is it going into infrastructure projects? No. The administration has been moving to freeze funding, lay off workers, claw back critical funding that Congress has previously approved, a lot of it on a bipartisan basis. So where's the money going? This is the deja vu part. Their efforts to once again cut taxes for large corporations and the wealthiest in America, the billionaire class, if you will. I mean, you kind of connect those dots together, and what it is this administration with Republicans in Congress robbing working families to give to the rich. So I ask the question again, when is enough enough? Over 70 million Americans rely on Medicaid, for example, one of the larger items in our federal budget. That includes 15 million Californians. Californians like the families I met at Rady Children's Hospital in San Diego a couple of weeks ago, who were sharing their stories. And I'll get to that in a minute here, but one of the big takeaways I had from that discussion was both the experiences of the families, their fear about not being able to afford the necessary health care that their children need, but also important business and policy lessons from the hospital administrators, their CEO, explaining to the public and to the press that the programs that they offer, not just his hospital, all hospitals, programs that they offer isn't just for Medicaid patients. A lot of their patients help use Medicaid to help afford the cost of services, but the programs are there for everybody. So if they're forced to cut the programs because of cuts to Medicaid, then those programs are gone for everybody, not just Medicaid patients, even patients and families that aren't on Medicaid. But the program's gone. The service is gone. It's impacting people's health, these proposed cuts. But Republicans say that, we've got to balance the budget. We've got to reduce costs. When we bring up specific examples like Medicaid, Republicans will insist, oh, no, that's not on the chopping block. We heard it from the president himself. It's not on the chopping block. But they continue to pursue their agenda of relief, tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans because they need some extra spending money at the expense of the health of children and families. When is enough enough? Medicaid isn't the only area of the budget that we know is on the chopping block. Republicans are looking to take aim at nutrition assistance programs for seniors, Meals on Wheels, you've heard of it, programs for low-income children. So let me get this straight. In 2017, Republicans, through their actions, through their votes, through their words, said, oh, we could afford hundreds of billions of dollars in permanent tax cuts for corporations. But today, we can't afford programs that keep kids and seniors from going hungry? When is enough enough? I just pray that when Americans look back on this moment in history, that the distinction of who stood where is crystal clear in their minds. The facts will be clear. But let's pray that the misinformation and disinformation machine on the other side doesn't cloud the truth. Because again, we know this administration is demanding cuts to public education, To meet their tax rate goals, there will be cuts to Social Security benefits, to veterans benefits, to small business assistance, to health care and research that saves lives. And the proposals that keep coming from the White House, just like all the nominees that have been coming from the White House, Republicans in Congress, Republicans in this Senate, continue to rubber stamp it all. That's why, at least on the House side, when members are going back to their districts and those with the courage to face their constituents' questions at a town hall are sensing the anger that's out there. Americans are angry, and they have a right to be angry. In some cases, they're asking the question, which we should ask ourselves on a daily basis here in this chamber. Why does each one of us run for office and come to serve in the Capitol? Is it to rig the system for the top 1%? It's not what I ran for. Is it to make life harder for working families? Is that what you ran for? Now, as I'm speaking, I reflect a lot on my upbringing. I've shared with a lot of you personally, privately, and I've shared publicly what life was like for me growing up in the working class community of Pacoima, California, proud community. And my dad for 40 years worked as a short order cook. For the same 40 years, my mom used to work cleaning houses. You can imagine, we grew up in a very modest home, on modest incomes. On those modest incomes, my parents raised my sister, my brother, and I, and insisted that we get a good education. Our home was filled with a lot of love, a lot of discipline, a lot of sacrifice. There were times when it was tough. There were times when money was more than just tight. So when you hear people talk about, oh, families that live paycheck to paycheck, I know what that means. I know what it means for so many families across the country who just a couple $100 difference makes a huge difference. I know the stress, the anxiety of when the car unexpectedly breaks down. And you look at your savings account, and on the one hand, you may not have enough to pay for repairs, but you also know you can't afford to not get to work. So what do? But it's the same spirit of families like mine and the community like the one I grew up in that says, I'm not interested in a handout. I just want a fair shot. I'm willing to work hard to get ahead. I'm willing to work hard to provide for my family. I'm willing to work hard to make sure my kids have a better shot at the American dream than I do. But that is not the spirit of the bill that we're going to be entertaining today. In fact, it's the opposite. This Republican tax/budget bill makes life harder for working families, makes working families pay more to subsidize tax breaks for the rich. And you know what? To add insult to injury, where they're seeking to cut to afford these tax breaks for the wealthy, are the very benefits that hardworking families have paid into through their taxes. These are benefits that they have earned. And so I ask again, colleagues, when is enough enough? If you won't answer to me, let me ask on behalf of some constituents that have reached out to my office, expressing their fear because of what these proposals would mean for them. People like Tina Ewing Wilson from the Inland Empire, who experienced what it was like the last time Medi-Cal recipients saw their benefits cut. See, Tina struggles with seizures and developmental disabilities and requires 24/7 care. But when the Great Recession hit a few years ago and Medicaid cuts followed, Tina knew she could only pay for her care by offering room and board to caregivers. Caregivers who went on to abuse drugs and alcohol and take advantage of her financially. She survived it. She's traumatized by it. And she's wondering what will happen if Republicans cut Medicaid again. There's a story of Sasha Bittner, who was born with cerebral palsy and who lives as a quadriplegic with speech and vision challenges. But with the help of services through Medicaid, Sasha went on to graduate from the University of California at Berkeley. That's very impressive. And she serves on the California State Council of Developmental Disabilities. She says Medicaid literally saved her life, and that a Medicaid cap would be an actual death sentence. And I think about a nursing aide from Orange County, California, who I met just a few weeks ago when she came to Washington to protest the proposed cuts to Medicaid. Josephine Rios. She's a proud healthcare worker, and she's a proud grandmother to a 7-year-old boy, Elijah. The medication alone to treat Elijah's cerebral palsy is normally about $5,000 a month. We'll save the debate for the cost of these treatments for another day, but that's what they are. And that's before you add the cost of physical therapy, the equipment, and other costs that he needs to live a meaningful life. But thanks to Medicaid, Elijah and his family can afford treatment. But they fear what would happen if these cuts go through. I share this, colleagues, because we're all hearing from our constituents, all of us, blue states, red states, purple states, all of us are hearing these fears, these real-world impacts of the proposed cuts. A vote for this budget, there's no way to add it up differently. A vote for this budget resolution is a vote to cut Medicaid. No ifs, ands, or buts. Republicans in the House have been clear, and it's the only way to read the bill before us today. So to my colleagues, again, when is enough enough? To folks watching at home, don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And I guess as I begin to close, I'll suggest that how we vote on this budget resolution will also determine where each one of us chooses to stand. Is it with the billionaires and the big corporations? Or is it with working families? And from here on out, for every round of tax breaks for billionaires that Republicans would ask us to consider and act on, we're all going to be on the record. Let the history show, do you stand with the wealthy or do you stand with the working class? I choose to stand with the hardworking families across the country that work hard to make communities in our country thrive. Big question for all of us. Big, big question for our country and our future. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Majority Whip.
Thank you, Mr. President.